future generations. We are honored to welcome government leaders, researchers, entrepreneurs, and young changemakers worldwide here in Stockholm and online to discuss ways to value and to invest in our future, especially the 10.9 billion people yet to be born in this century who have no voice in our decisions, but whose prospects will be entirely shaped by them. My name is Elizabeth Cousins. I'm President and CEO of the United Nations Foundation. I'm delighted to welcome you all here today. It can be hard to think about the future when the present is so pressing. Every day seems to bring a new dimension of crisis: COVID, climate, the war in Ukraine, the fearful prospect of catastrophic hunger, social polarization and violence in many of our countries. Everything now is urgent, and everything needs our most urgent attention. But precisely because of today's urgencies, we need brave new thinking about the future, because our decisions will shape it, and because we are responsible for it. The choices we make now will determine the safety, the health, and the prosperity of the people of tomorrow, and we can decide whether we bequeath a troubled and impoverished world, or we can decide to do something different and something better. 50 years ago, here in Stockholm, global leaders grappled with this challenge. The Stockholm Declaration and Action Plan for the Human Environment was a pivotal first step in recognizing our solemn responsibility to steward our environment for the future. Even further back, the UN Charter itself pledged to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, so the UN itself was founded on an intergenerational promise. But 50 years on, 77 years on, we struggle to fulfill that promise. We're burning through the natural and institutional inheritance of future generations, and we're trapped in cycles of short-termism, limited imagination, and mistrust. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said we face a stark choice between breakdown or breakthrough, and I think we know that he is right. This is no easy choice, and many forces pull in the opposite direction. But you are all here because you believe it's a choice we can make, and because in all of your work, you are already demonstrating the strategy, the commitment, and the drive required to make it. So let's get straight away to our amazing lineup of speakers and guests today. We will start with a window into future generations, who they are, where they'll live, what they'll care about, and how we can center them in our thinking and our plans. Many young people alive today will live to see the end of this century, and their children and grandchildren will see far beyond that. So they are a bridge generation into our future. So we'll first hear from 3 young women actively working to shape a better future for the next and future generations. Ms. Aishwarya Machani, a UN Foundation Next Generation Fellow and member of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force. Ms. Bianca Goebel from Foundations for Tomorrow, and Ms. Makanalani Gomez, co-chair of the Indigenous Youth Caucus. Aish, Bianca, and Makanalani will give us a window into the people of the future and what we can start to do for them today. And they will also introduce a contract for the future and present it for consideration to Stefan Löfven, former Prime Minister of Sweden and co-chair of the Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism. So Aish, it's my great pleasure to turn the floor first to you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, it's an honor to be with you here today to talk about how to advance a common agenda for future generations. I was born on the 20th of October, 1998. As a child growing up in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, I have been lucky enough to be part of the most educated generation in history, and I have benefited from decades of innovation in technology and communications. However, I have also grown up amidst one of the worst economic crises the world has seen, and I am now facing an uncertain future, one that will be ravaged by the effects of climate change and biodiversity loss. I know, therefore, in the same way that my future was shaped by the people who came before me, that the fate of future generations is in my hands. So who are these future generations? Of course, we can't know for certain, however, data can tell us a lot. The first thing to note is that they are a majority. 10.9 billion people are projected to be born between today and the end of this century. That's many more people than are alive today. The second thing to note is that the future is unevenly distributed. Some countries are living majority, birth rates in these countries are declining, and the number of people alive today is greater than the number of people who will be born by the end of this century. Others are future majority, where the reverse is true, and you can see on this graph that the number of future majority countries outweighs the number of living majority countries. And the third thing to note is that the places where future generations are set to be born are places which currently suffer from entrenched global inequalities. 71% of future generations will be born in low and middle income countries of today. Of course, we cannot know what future generations want. However, science and conversations with those with the greatest stake in the future can help us begin to plan. The data we have here, for example, shows us that we must make it a priority to start addressing global inequality and the persisting effects of colonization. And young people around the world are rallying to tell us what more needs to be done. At the very least, we should leave the people of the future a healthy planet. So whilst we are uncertain, this shouldn't prevent us from acting for future generations. And some people are already doing so. Allow me to hand over to Bianca. She and her colleague Taylor have been working with the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales and the Unlock the Future Coalition to design a Future Generations Leadership Accelerator to educate and empower young people to be champions for the future.
Thank you. So the first cohort that went through the Future Generations Leadership Accelerator participated in 4 weeks of online learning coupled with interactive live sessions. And we had an enormous response. More than 350 young people from around the world registered and 170 actively contributed insights that have been collated into this contract for our future being presented today. And the youth that responded were diverse. More than 42 countries were represented, and the majority of respondents were from the Global South, which we've just heard are representative of where those yet to be born to the end of this century will come from. So, the insights that we collected focused on 4 areas. Understanding. Young people understand the imperative to act in a way that protects future generations. An emerging leader from Nigeria said, "The universalism of human rights transcends time. Equity must be intergenerational." They also have a vision for a better, more equitable future. An emerging leader from the UK said, "The generations currently alive have an unprecedented opportunity to either sustain life for future generations or destroy it." They also have a commitment to work towards this better future together. A young leader from the United States said, "Humanity is one long line of ancestry that must learn to take care of one generation after another in order for us to thrive and for our planet to thrive." And last but not least, these young leaders put a call out for action to leaders like the ones sitting in this room today, to help protect future generations. An emerging leader from India said, "I believe the future is an extension of the present. Our responsibilities to future generations are similar to our responsibilities to ourselves and to other people living today." And this is not a new concept by any means. Our First Nations people around the world have long nurtured wisdom around protecting future generations.
Aloha mai kako. Deep love and gratitude to you all, especially to this land that we are on and to the indigenous peoples of this land and to everyone here today. O wau no o Makanalani Malia Gomes, he kanaka maoli no. I am Makanalani Gomes. I am Native Hawaiian and one of 3 newly elected co-chairs of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. I stand beside other youth and young folks in our ask for the protection of future generations. In my culture, we have a proverbial saying, "Ika wā mā mua, ika wā mā hope." The time before us is the time after us. In our knowledge system, we understand generational time is cyclical, meaning that we cannot imagine our future without understanding all that the past has to offer. As an Indigenous woman, I stand before you carrying the future generations. I carry my daughters and therefore my great-granddaughters. Our babies are here. They deserve to take up their privileged responsibility to care for our first mother, Earth Mother, and to give a voice to the autonomy of the ancestral elements above all else. Let us listen to the stories and the truths of our past so future generations can manifest into the ancestral dreams of both our ancestors and our descendants. Mahalo nui ya o kopa kahia pau. Many thanks and blessings.
Thank you so much, Bianca and Makanalani. Drawing on the energy and the spirit of young people like Bianca and Makanalani, we have put together a contract for our future, outlining what we as young people are committed to do for the future, but also what we will need leaders to help us with. Leaders, as Bianca said, the type of leaders who are sitting in this room. Today, we would like to present this contract to one of the co-chairs of the Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Global Public Goods, who are already working to suggest how the international community can better understand and act for the future. So Prime Minister Levane, we'll hope you will help us as we strengthen intergenerational solidarity between generations past and present and future. Prime Minister Levane, if you'd like to say a few words, we do welcome that.
Absolutely. I first thank you so much for the invitation here, and I will say also a few words closing, but just in relating to the contract, yes, I feel very much obliged. My whole adult life has been about creating inclusion and participation, because I strongly believe that that also gives us the best end result. The more people that are included, the better result. That goes not least for youth, so I assure you that during our process in the High-Level Advisory Board, and that goes for both me and my co-chair, Madam President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, that we think about this in our process, inclusion, and that means, of course, also youth. But it also means that our end result, our report that will be launched in January next year, will also have, of course, this perspective with us, because for us it is important. I used to say that youth are closer to next generation, so we need to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. For those of you that have a printed copy, you can read the contract now. Otherwise, we'll be uploading it online, and we can make sure you have access to it. Elizabeth, I'm going to hand the floor back to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to you all for an incredibly powerful start, and I think for giving a jump start to the High-Level Advisory Board's work. So you see, you may not even need until January now. So thank you all. Well, we now want to turn to questions of delivery and implementation, because the principle of intergenerational equity has actually been around a long time, but it has been very hard to operationalize in many contexts. Nonetheless, some countries and regions have made important strides. So we now want to hear from two leaders who are at the forefront of such efforts. First, Ms. Chito Mpemba, the Youth Envoy to the African Union, and Ms. Sophie Howe, the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales. Chito, we want to start with you.
Thank you very much, Excellencies and distinguished guests. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here. On the 1st of November 2021, the African Union chairperson appointed me into his cabinet as the youngest diplomat to represent the voices of all 55 member states in Africa, within the cabinet and within Africa. And this has been such a huge responsibility. that I have. And I am privileged to sit here today representing the African youth, but more so, the future voices of young people yet to be born. These are the citizens who are depending on us to create that future for them, a conducive environment and a world where they can thrive. I imagine them taking a peek at this Stockholm high-level event and wondering whether the planet is indeed healthy for the prosperity of all. This should propel us and ignite that urgency to act towards a common agenda for future generations. I have an ambition in this role to ensure that the voices of young people reach our decision makers, but not only so, but ensure that we focus on the future generations and those that are yet to be born too. Young people constitute of 60% of Africa's population, and we are the most vulnerable to the immediate and future consequences of acute changes, including in climate change, education, and livelihoods. Now imagine those that are yet to be born, which is why we have to be intentional and we have to act now. And this will involve political commitments to ensure that when they sit on the table and deliberate, we are included as young people, but also those that are yet to be born too. To ensure that there's inclusion and participation on the table, on that decision-making table. To ensure that platforms are created, platforms for young people to talk and discuss, and also ensure that the solutions they have for the future are taken into account. Including access is very important. Do we have access for young people on the table? Additionally, how can we collaborate amongst generations, including intergenerational dialogues, such as the ones that we're having today? With this, I'd like to end with my mantra, which is less speeches and more concrete actions, which is why we've made it deliberate to ensure that, and as much as we can speak about the youth and the future, that we also get to interact with them on the ground. How we interact with young people on the ground at the moment has been through engagement. I'm currently going on a 60 days youth engagement tour. And in this youth engagement tour, I'll be physically visiting countries to sit down with young people on the ground, to visit communities, to see the challenges that they're faced with at regional level as well as national level, as well as to hear what they think should be the solutions for Africa, by the youth, for the youth, as well as for the future generations to come. In addition to this, we've just rolled out a digital survey. This digital survey is specifically so that when we come up with the solutions, they also include the voices of the youth that will lead our tomorrow, as well as look at the challenges that they are faced with, that they should also incorporate for solutions that will protect our future and protect those that are yet to be born. I thank you.
Thank you, Chito. Sophie, I want to turn next to you. You've been in your role since about 2016, and so you've worked very hard to operationalize this principle of intergenerational equity. Tell us a bit about lessons that you've learned.
Well, as global leaders, we cannot possibly claim to be interested in and listening to the voices of younger generations unless we are willing to reform our systems of governance to embed in every aspect of our decision-making, futures thinking. We cannot claim to be working towards long-term goals such as the SDGs without moving away from the short-termism that we see from one electoral cycle to the next, moving beyond our silos and recognising the interconnections between poverty, between racial justice, between climate justice. And we cannot claim to have governance fit for future generations if we do not have legal requirements to embed the voices of our future generations in our governance and decision-making infrastructure. But it takes a brave government and it takes brave leadership to require that to happen. And I'm particularly pleased with the Secretary General's proposals in our our common purpose agenda to promote future generations thinking, a declaration on future generations and a special envoy for future generations to reform the way in which the UN itself and member countries think about acting in the interests of future generations. In Wales, we have had that brave political decision-making, the first country in the world to have legislated to protect the interests of future generations with one overarching principle, that all of our institutions at a local level, our local government, right up to our national government and our ministers in the Welsh Government must demonstrate how they're taking decisions in a way which meets today's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. They're brave because they've set out 7 long-term goals, not just in some aspirational policy document, but set out in law with legal duties and requirements to take steps towards meeting those long-term goals. And they have legislated for common sense principles of long-term intergenerational decision-making through 5 key principles: that decisions must demonstrate how they've accounted for the long term, that they must seek to prevent problems from occurring or from getting worse, that they must be integrated, so recognising the connections between all aspects of well-being policy, that bodies must work in a collaborative way, and bodies must involve citizens in the decision-making process. And the minister who led this legislation described it as the Common Sense Act, and I say there is a need for a Common Sense Act and declaration across the world, because in public policy making and governance internationally, common sense often isn't that common. And the lack of common sense means that we are failing our future generations. There is one final area where our government has been braved, not just applying this legislation to themselves and then marking their own homework, but appointing an independent commissioner, that's myself, to hold them to account, to be the future, the conscience of future generations, to act as the guardian of the interests of the future generations of Wales, those yet to be born, those who don't have a voice. And that's why I'm particularly pleased to be working with our younger generations who are closer to the thinking that needs to be embedded in current governance infrastructure and current decision making. I believe that every country in the world owes a commitment to our future generations, the 10.9 billion people yet to be born in this century alone. And if we look 50,000 years to the future, 6.75 trillion people yet to be born. And the decisions that we take today, specifically and particularly on addressing inequity, on addressing the climate crisis, on addressing the biodiversity crisis, will fundamentally determine the lives that those future generations lead or don't lead. That's why we require very brave decision-making now. That's why we require every country in the world to be legislating to protect the interests of future generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie and Chito. And now, in the spirit of intergenerational dialogue, I'm delighted to bring in our co-hosts for today's roundtable, the governments of Kenya and Sweden. We're very thrilled to be collaborating with you, and just our gratitude to you for your co-hosting this conference overall. I'd like to turn the floor first to His Excellency Minister Keriako Tobiko, the Minister of Environment and Forestry of Kenya, to say a few words.
Thank you very much. It's quite amazing sitting around the table listening to our young leaders. We keep always referring to as leaders for tomorrow. What is quite clear to me, and I'm sure to all of us, is that they are not actually leaders for tomorrow. They are leaders for today. And of course, tomorrow for the future. And they have better ideas. They appreciate and understand what has to be done better than ourselves. And secondly, I think let's also acknowledge the fact that we as the leaders, we as parents, have abdicated our responsibilities as trustees and custodians. The saying goes that we don't inherit the earth from our forefathers, we borrow it from our children. And that really is there. And Wangari Maathai said that those who destroy environment and nature are not often the ones who suffer the consequences. It is generations that have absolutely nothing to do with this that suffer. And how true it is in respect of the current planetary crisis. I think science and studies show that our children, the youth, are more worried about their future than we ourselves are worried about their future. I think scientifically that's just really true. There's also, I think, evidence, scientific evidence that they have lost faith in our leadership. It is important, I think, first of all, to ensure that we leave this planet in a better state than we found it. And we must therefore take action to save the planet for the benefit of our children. It is important that we institutionalize in our legislation, in our constitution, as in fact in our case there is an obligation on government to undertake, to have regard to all these. But it is one thing to have these provisions in a constitution and in the law, and in policy statement, and quite as the Chido says, too much talk, little action. And I think what is required is action. And the children, the youth, who would be the parents for future generations, know exactly what has to be done. They require to be enabled, to be recognized, and to be given a voice and a space at the table, such as in this particular case. So this is not a futuristic discussion. This is not an academic exercise. This is real issue. And I think in all the conferences we have attended, Stockholm Plus 50 will distinguish itself as one where the youth who have a greater stake than all of us have been given the necessary political and supportive environment and recognition. Kenya associates itself with the draft ministerial statement that has been circulated. And I think the beginning point for all of us who are seated here today is to demonstrate that we mean what we say by ascribing to the ministerial statement that can be reflected as one of the outcomes of this conference. And secondly, to ensure that all the policy statements that the Youth Task Force has been and document are captured in the chair's summary. And I think working with my colleague, the distributor, we make our commitment that we do, but we need your help as the delegates to ensure that in the outcome documents, the voice of the youth present and future generations are articulated and captured. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Minister Annika Strandhäll, Minister of Climate and Environment for Sweden. I'm very delighted to turn the floor next to you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And dear all around this table, it's really a pleasure to welcome all of you to Stockholm. And actually also a real honor to host this discussion with my colleague, Mr. Tobika, and the organizers, Unlock the Future Coalition and the UN Foundation, of course. The triple planetary crisis is the biggest challenge of our time, and people are already today suffering the consequences, and Stockholm Plus 50 is just about that, about providing space for deep reflection on the path we are on today and where we are headed. And of course, this task of overcoming the challenges that lay before us becomes even more pressing when you keep in mind how many people, as Elizabeth said initially, who are not yet born that will be affected by our decisions today. You have heard it, a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity. That is the vision for this meeting and for Stockholm Plus 50, and it is a message on where we need to act upon to protect our planet and achieve sustainable development for the well-being of both this and, of course, the future generations. And actually, we wish to recommit to our responsibilities to future generations, as actually it was expressed firmly in the outcome in the Stockholm Conference of 1972. And I want to quote for you, because the declaration from 1972 reads, "To defend and improve the human environment for present and future generations has become an imperative goal for mankind." Indeed, the imperative goal must also be to create better conditions and opportunities for those who come after us by ensuring sustainable societies, investing in new green jobs, education, and robust welfare systems. Young people of today, they push us forward, they demand action, and they dare to speak the truth to power. And we must acknowledge their leadership and act on their demands. Listen to science, accelerate the transition, and ensure that our lives are not lived at the expense of the future generations. During the Stockholm Plus 50 preparations, meaningful youth participation has been a key for us in all aspects, both in planning, delivery, and what we also hope will be a strong legacy from this conference. We have really strived to ensure that youth are both in front and center of Stockholm Plus 50. The Youth Task Force that was, as you know, formed in Glasgow, their policy paper stresses, amongst many things, the importance of establishing and strengthening the representation of future generations. I am also therefore very proud to be able to deliver on one of these recommendations from the Youth Task Force by today also present for you a joint ministerial statement on a common agenda for future generations. Today, we are launching this statement, and I would really, I look around the table here, also encourage as many as possible of you to sign it. So at the end of this meeting tomorrow, we can communicate a strong signal of support to both present and future generations. We have already, and I think it's worth mentioning, so far, and we actually put it on the table just recently, received support by the honorable ministers of Albania, Bangladesh, Dominican Republic, Fiji, Namibia, Maldives, Norway, Liberia, Zambia, Kenya, Sweden, of course, and I just received a note from my friends behind that also said that Costa Rica can be added to the list. So that's great. The statement sets out to preserve the needs and interests of future generations, promote meaningful participation of young people, safeguard life on Earth and increase our efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda, and fourth, and help forge the new global consensus on what our future should look like. I look forward to working with all of you to ensure that future generations can live full and healthy lives underpinned by the dignity and rights as this statement sets out. in order to succeed, we must also look upon the decisions we take today through the eyes and harsh lenses of the future generations, and allow our actions to be guided by intergenerational equity. As you know, and a few of you also have mentioned, our Common Agenda report, launched last year by the Secretary General, also gives us an opportunity to reinvigorate and further strengthen the United Nations, and we need to push forward to deliver on the good ideas and proposals in this report, of which strengthened focus on future generation is one. I wish to also, of course, extend my gratitude to Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf and the Swedish former Prime Minister Stefan Löfven for your leadership of the high-level panel of effective multilateralism. I much look forward to your report that will be presented next year, and I hope this conversation also will help you push your agenda forward. And again, a warm welcome from my side to Stockholm Plus 50, to all of you, and a special thanks to all the young people who have dedicated their time and effort in advocating for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you both again for your leadership and for your collaboration and partnership today. Well, I want to now bring in some of our other voices from our roundtable. Turning next to Jayathma Wickramanayake, the Special Envoy on Youth for the UN Secretary General. Jayathma, you've been in this role for now a number of years, so you have a great perspective on these issues. Tell us about what you see are the biggest challenges going forward and what we need to do about them.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. As you said in your opening remark, it's hard to think about the future when the challenges of today are so pressing. So let me start my intervention expressing solidarity with the young people of Ukraine, Afghanistan, Yemen, and many other places in the world who are trapped in cycles of conflict and crises that they did not create. So with that, my first point is to recognize that today's young people are the most affected by all our actions or inactions of today and of the past. Not only today's young people are disproportionately affected by the multifaceted and compounding challenges we are experiencing, like COVID-19, the climate crisis, growing inequalities, conflicts, and much more. Today's young people will also, as was said many times in this panel, will inherit the consequences of the decisions today along with future generations. So despite this undeniable reality, young people are more often than not sidelined or deliberately excluded from decision-making processes at global, regional, and national and local levels. For instance, while almost half of the world's population is under the age of 30, only 2.6% of the world's parliamentarians are under the age of 30, and an average age of a world leader right now is 62 years. Recently, we've seen that decision makers, particularly political leaders, have become more and more comfortable recognizing young people's role as agents of change, which is an important achievement, but this recognition is still not translated into concrete commitments, concrete actions, and dedicated resources. So we must engage young people in a meaningful, diverse, and effective manner as full-fledged partners, and not only as beneficiaries in every step of the way, if we are to make policies and decisions that are future-proof. They must also be meaningfully engaged not only on youth-related issues or issues that adults think are relevant to young people. They should be engaged in all matters that are affecting people's lives, from the planet to human rights to peace and security to development. We cannot address or mainstream the rights and interests of future generations if we do not acknowledge and safeguard the rights of the young people who live in this world today. So we must protect what we value, and that is my second point. It is that we must ensure that while we call for young people to speak up and hold their governments accountable and advocate for future generations, are we creating safe spaces for them to exercise their rights? Young people, particularly the ones who are most marginalized and vulnerable, including young women and girls, young refugees, migrants, LGBTIQ young people, indigenous young people with disabilities, and more, are at the front of the fight towards a more just and sustainable future. But over the past months and years, it's been particularly concerning to witness an increasing repression of youth and youth voices who are peacefully exercising their right to raise their voices, to hold decision makers accountable for the actions that are threatening their and their future livelihoods. And an increasing number of cases, young people are being exposed to brutality, repression, and violence simply because of their age and simply because they're speaking up. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated this issue of shrinking civic space that often affect youth disproportionately, and it's imperative that we invest, strengthen, and finance young people's networks and self-organization to ensure that they can respond to threats against their safety. So if they are to advocate a better future for themselves and for future generations, protecting their human rights and participation in civic spaces today should be a precondition. Lastly, we need to make sure that we put our money where our mouth is and that our investments are bold, future-proof, and evidence-based. Business as usual, as my colleague Chido said, is not enough anymore. Continuously spending millions to meetings to discuss international and multi-stakeholder commitments to secure a better future for all the while also funding and subsidizing fossil fuel industries on the side, should not be happening. As we rebuild from COVID-19 and look to address the stark inequalities that this pandemic has exacerbated, we have a unique opportunity to rebuild a greener, resilient, and a sustainable future. And I hope that all of us recognize this opportunity within this challenge and work towards the realization of those goals. We need investments in global public goods, like education, a healthy planet, global health, information, peace, and many more. Investments must target a positive transformational change at a systems level towards a new status quo, which young people have been calling for years. The many challenges that we are experiencing today are the reason of short-term thinking and short-term decision-making. So now is the time to move from short-termism to long-termism, towards a world where the interests and needs of younger and future generations are valued over short-term profit. And I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayathma. You are always bracingly clear and also an incredible champion for common sense. Thank you. I want to turn next to a couple of our distinguished delegates in the room. Turning first to the distinguished Foreign Minister of Bangladesh. It's very good to see you again, sir.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, young visionaries and leaders, it is an inspiring experience to be part of this roundtable. Your words and commitments have renewed my faith in the spirit of young and youth. Bangladesh has a relatively young population. 74% of population is young, and 50% are below the age of 25 years. Our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina keeps reminding us that we must sacrifice our present for our future generations. Every single day, our young men and women are emerging onto the national scene. It is our responsibility to create an enabling environment for them to give shape to their own future, free from all forms of deprivations and discriminations. It is our responsibility to provide them hopes, opportunity, and dreams by saving this planet Earth. In order to provide opportunity, in 2008, our government announced the vision to build a digital Bangladesh by 2021. It captured the imagination of our young people. That vision has now become a reality, put to test by COVID-19 pandemic. With our youth in the lead, we are now aiming to build a smart Bangladesh. Nearly 650,000 young men and women have registered as freelance IT experts, and our income from IT sector is over 1.5 billion now, hoping to reach more than 5 billion by 2025. Most of it is being done by the innovativeness of the young people. In 2018, our government released the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. Delta Plan 2100, 80 years from now, with a view to leaving behind a safe, climate-resilient, and prosperous delta for our future generations. The notion of intergenerational equity is central to the plan so that all our interventions for climate action, biodiversity protection, water management, or infrastructure development are tailored to the needs and aspirations of our succeeding generations. In fact, we have given our future generation a challenge to look beyond and get involved. We happily endorse today the ministerial statement, "Let us join hands across generations to build a future we want." Let us keep our hopes alive, our dreams alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. What we're doing is mixing up a bit of comments from the floor from our distinguished delegates as well as members of our roundtable, in part to accommodate the timing of different delegates who have to go into plenary to make their remarks. We will also have a segment at the end where you can put your placards up, but that's the reason why I'm picking on some of you as we go. And next up is the Foreign Minister of Liberia. If I can invite you, sir, to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Liberia is proud to be an integral part of Stockholm Plus 50 in Stockholm under the theme, "A Healthy Planet for the Prosperity of All, Our Responsibility, Our Opportunity." We take pride and honor in participating in this milestone Stockholm Plus 50 signature event as a signatory to a common agenda for future generations. Ministerial statement on future generations. In my capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Liberia, more than 63% of the population of Liberia are youth. We join this ministerial statement on future generations in representation of His Excellency Dr. George Manneh Weah, President of the Republic of Liberia, and the government and people of Liberia. And we do so in empathy, solidarity, and support of our youth, and more so in preparation for future generations of the Republic of Liberia. Hence, Liberia reaffirms its relentless commitment to a common agenda for future generations, especially so as that agenda sets to preserve the needs and interests of future generations, promote meaningful participation of young people, safeguard life on earth, increase efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, and help forge a new global consensus on what our future should look like. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I will go to one more delegate, the Minister from Egypt, before going back to our roundtable. If I can ask you to hold your applause. We want to applaud everyone, but we'll chew into our time a little bit, and we want to make sure we hear from as many as possible, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, Excellencies, fellow ministers, and participants to this roundtable. At the outset, I would like to commend and thanks to my sister from Stockholm for organizing that event. It's really a historical moment here, Stockholm Plus 50, but this Stockholm Plus 50 this year is different. It's different not only because we're gathered here after 50 years of effort and looking at what has been achieved and taking stock of that and really looking on the future. It's different because the voices of the young people and the youth is an integral part of that, having a document that shows these are their needs and how they would like to shape their future. So we're moving from words into actions, into real packaging of what they would like to see, a common agenda for the future generations. would simply mean that we collectively need to push that agenda forward, quickly, actionable, but much more important, where everyone would have a role and a responsibility and an opportunity to be seen in that. And that's not an easy task. And from that perspective, we see that the youth, as part of that process of Stockholm Plus 50, moving onward to COP27, which is a COP for implementation, would have those not only messages, but solutions to be brought to the table. Let us not only push the agenda by having everyone around the table, but having the solutions that could be replicated and upscale. And that's because if we need to meet the urgency, we need to have those of the how, and that could be done. Finally, a COP27, not only for implementation, but an inclusive one. An inclusive that looks at the needs of the human beings, because that's where we all live. We share the same planet, but there are common needs that are very obvious, which is the basic needs of the food, the water, the shelter, and the energy. How we're bringing all those together to speed up the process for our future generations. Looking forward to seeing you all at COP27, where we together with the future generations, the young men and ladies, and even children, can prove to ourselves and also to who is coming after that we can do it, and we are up to that fight, and we will succeed, because there's only a one and only planet Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I now want to turn to three of our roundtable participants who all have powerful experience of taking intergenerational action in their respective countries. Tamaisha Eitel, who is the director of Future Barbados, Mohamed Ali Azayez, who is the president of the Jasmine Foundation, and Eduardo Cavalieri, who's the former Secretary of the Environment for Rio de Janeiro. And Tamaisha, can I turn first to you?
Thank you, everyone gathered here, everyone online, and those who will watch this in the future. My name is Tamaisha Eitel, and I am the director of Future Barbados. We are dubbed a moonshot factory, which is a hybrid think tank and accelerator out of the Prime Minister's office in Barbados. We have been fortunate to have a leader and be supported by a leader who firmly believes that sustainable development of a country is through its people, and particularly its young people. During our first phase, dubbed Project Catapult, we assembled a team of doers, thinkers, and dreamers under the age of 35 to come together to help create and find solutions to some of our country's biggest challenges. What has this investment actually looked like? It has three parts. We have been given resources, access, and trust. For 6 months, we brought together 25 creative and engaged minds to work across 7 challenge areas and provided support that valued their time and energy. Cohort members were given access to experts and information to help create their solutions. Out of this, we have developed a suite that is policy-backed, data-driven, and technology-based solutions that can not only move the needle, but be truly transformative to our island. These interventions range from the blue economy to GovTech to crime and safety, but the actual solutions doesn't matter. Unlike the traditional incubators, our government has committed further to invest in the implementation of these ideas. As we move into our next phase, dubbed Flight, the government will pair the solutions with respective ministries and stakeholders to fast-track the transformation and implement these solutions. Future Barbados is proof that when given true agency, resources, access, and trust to young people, we can really have transformational change. We will do in 6 to 8 months what typically takes years. The investment risk our leaders have taken far outweighs the risk of the challenges that we're aiming to solve. We want to move beyond just looking at challenges and towards opportunities. This model doesn't leave problem solving to young people, but allows for intergenerational cooperation through knowledge sharing and collaborative implementation. I encourage leaders to look at this model as true commitment and not just an intergenerational promise, but intergenerational action. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamaisha. I knew we couldn't get us to restrain our applause, but I'll keep trying. Mohammed Ali, you're next.
Thank you very much, Excellency and distinguished guests. I am Mohammed Ali Azayez, a former advisor to the Minister of Economy, but also recently elected as President of Jasmine Foundation. I had the opportunity to work for Jasmine Foundation for 8 years, and the idea comes that we should create a platform for the Tunisian younger generation to, consolidate the democratic process in Tunisia after the 2011 revolution, and to share, of course, the values of the civic engagement and also democratic values. So our work is based on 3 levels. Like the personal level, so building capacities, but also regional and national, with encouraging young people to be involved in the public life, because, under the dictatorship, we hadn't this opportunity as the younger generation to cooperate with government or parliament, and also, of course, without forgetting or with a special focus on the local, because local is very important for the younger generation, and it is from where they came. So at the personal level, in terms of building capacities, we tried, of course, to put together the old, let's say, leaders like ministers, MPs, etc., with the younger one, just to share the knowledge with each other. So it's So we allow the younger generation to take risks, to dream big, but also to unleash their passion and energy. After the revolution, we drafted a new constitution. We had a lot of discussions about the political system, etc. And the younger generation is there. So we lobbied to include the younger generation in the first in the first candidates of the electoral list. It's not only the legislative ones, but also the local ones, and we progressed in this. So how to collaborate, how to network, how to be, in touch with MPs, etc. It's also a learning skills, and then we contributed in ensuring cooperation with the different youth NGOs, but not also youth NGOs, but bringing also disengaged people who start out of the blue to know how to deal with political makers and like, let's say, elder influencers. At the local level, we worked with a very strong project, which is Active Citizen Project with the British Council. It's to bring in disengaged younger generation from local communities and train them, provide them with the right skills to make surveys with the neighborhood, because in my country, although our younger generation is globalized, they are connected on Facebook, etc., but also they have this such of commitment to their communities, to their neighborhoods. So we, based on that, values, they make surveys so to allow them to characterize the priorities of their communities, and then through these surveys, the results and the finding of these surveys, they can know the priority of their neighborhood, and then this priority, it helps so we help them to implement that. For instance, we had like an old, like in a neighborhood in Tunis, they don't have like a national library. Then from an old bus, we created like a moving bus, like moving library for the community, which helps like the whole neighborhood to have this library that they dreamed to have. So, and for this process, in the implementation, in the planning, in the designers, all the younger generation and the elder generation were together. I mean, from the neighborhood and the local communities to, achieve their common goals. So our work, in its heart is to put together not only the younger generation, but ensure a real dialogue between the elder generation and the younger generation for a common future. I wanted, Jack, in my speech to talk about that because it's very important to see practical tools, to translate all of these values and to translate our contract for future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. That was wonderful. Eduardo, over to you immediately.
Thank you very much, Ms. Elizabeth. Excellencies here, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. My name is Eduardo Cavalieri. I was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where I lived my entire life. I'm 27, so I'm a son of Rio 92 generation, which has left an impressive legacy of international cooperation, dialogue, and environmental awareness in the whole entire world. Almost 30 years later, our mayor, a former C40 president as well, invited me to become the city secretary of the environment. I was also elected by my peers, the national coordinator of the Brazilian Capitals for Sustainability. Today, I've answered a call to step into politics, further representing our common shares, our common causes here. The first insight I can share from my experience in Rio should be obvious. Generations must cooperate. We're facing some of the greatest threats in our history: climate change, pandemics, extreme poverty, wars. Of course, we need you, and you need us. Each generation has a contribution to make. The youth need to trust the elders, and the elders must share responsibilities with us. In Rio, our mayor understood the importance of sharing power and responsibilities through generations. Conversely, the youth decided to trust his legacy. Education, transportation, climate, economic development, and other main departments are being led by young leaders from this generation under the guidance of a more experienced leader. Together we can get the job done. Second thought, climate change is an emergency. There is no more time. There is no room for highlighting differences between generations. It is time to share our efforts, our causes, our dreams, and our future. Being a son of Rio 92 chose me. My responsibility became crucial. Fighting to keep our forests standing in Rio and Brazil is putting my life and other Brazilian climate defenders' lives at risk. Brazil is the 4th country in the world that kills environmentalists the most. Climate action there is under violence, militia, and crime. In the past years, dozens, hundreds of lives were lost in the Amazon, Pantanal, Atlantic forest. How could we stand alone? We need you, and you need us. Again, we need to work together. Act now, together. Finally, my country has a tradition of appreciating dialogue and cooperation. My city is globally praised for welcoming different people. Our country has profound social divides and development issues. That's true. However, such challenges cannot hide the extraordinary nation Brazil is. This October, Rio invites all generations sailing from cities around the world to discuss their legacies and shared responsibilities towards the future. Come to Rio, come to Brazil, come to Rio Plus Study. We, the Global South, we need you. We are waiting for you there. Thank you all.
Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you, all of you, for everything that you're doing in your lives and sharing those experiences with us. I want to turn now to Licia Noronha, who is a senior UN leader, and I wonder if you can reflect on what you've heard and just how you see these issues. Licia.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you for inviting UNEP to this table. You know, it's really interesting that the focus here is on intergenerational responsibility and intergenerational equity, because this is written into the DNA of UNEP. UNEP was born out of 1972, and this is exactly what we have been concerned with from the beginning, although we perhaps haven't spoken about it. But as you see, most of the work of UNEP is taking the long view, and that's what the youth take, the long view. And therefore, the interests and the duties to the future and the concerns of youth are very much aligned with the concerns of UNEP. And that is exactly where UNEP has been locating its work. Take, for example, this whole concern with the health of the planet. And we heard the reference to global public goods. And all of the global public goods that you mentioned, Jatma, are actually interconnected and very much part of what UNEP's doing, because we look at the ecosystem goods and services, which are global public goods, and we work towards increasing, protecting, and enhancing the supply of these global public goods. How do we do that? We do that by looking at the demand side of things, looking at the pressures that are on these global public goods. And the focus is therefore on decarbonizing, decoupling or dematerializing, whichever you prefer to use, detoxifying, but also ecosystem restoration. All of these are absolute pressures on the global public goods that we talk of in terms of ecosystem goods and services. And therefore it becomes really important that we work to enhance this, and that UNEP has more tools and more resources to be able to do this in a more systematic way. But going forward, let me focus on 4 things that are really important, reflecting also on what we've just heard. That stressing the interdependence between human rights and the environment is absolutely crucial, which is why you've been hearing again and again UNEP's leadership, Inga Anderson, speaking to the human rights, to the human right to a clean and healthy environment as being so important and becoming universal, because that will also in many ways help protect the concerns and the issues that were just brought up by a colleague from Brazil. So focusing on rights are central to this discussion. The second very important aspect of us moving forward is looking at mainstreaming the One Health approach. COVID has made it incredibly clear that we need to look at the interconnections between ecosystem, human health, and the health of animals. And this is something that UNEP has been focusing on, but not sufficiently, but we are now focusing on it very closely with FAO and others of the tripartite. Thirdly, bringing in the voices of youth and others. Look, UNEP's been working with the youth for a very long time. For the reasons I've just said, it's written into our DNA. But we're now working towards making it much more central to our work, bringing in very clearly the voices of youth into our governing councils, the UNEA, but also into the Environmental Management Group, which is the United Nations Environmental Management Coordination Body, and we've also now engaging, and Jatma is part of that at the senior officials level. So we have already started getting not started, but we have been involved with engaging youth. But now we also want to bring in, apart from the science and basing policy on science, bringing in alternative voices, indigenous peoples, into our thinking, because it's very evident and clear that there are lots of solutions out there that in the context of a planet that is so constrained and so affected, and that will affect our development opportunities, that we look at solutions which are other solutions. And finally, I know your light's on, I'm going to stop in a minute. Finally, looking at the GDP and going beyond GDP, because unless we look at economic systems, we will not be able to look after the environment. And the biggest signal is the GDP, so we need to go beyond GDP. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Lijian, and thank you all. I know the time is criminally short for all of this conversation. I want to turn finally to 2 youth organizers who are with us today. Nora Baruba, President of the National Council of Swedish Youth Organizations, followed by Angela Zhang, who's a leader from Girl Up. Nora, please.
Thank you. We sit here today 50 years after the first Stockholm Conference, a meeting that set ambitious visions for the world's environmental work. And since then, we've seen deteriorated ecosystems and rapid ecological and environmental decline. This is not a 50-year celebration. It's a mark, it's a reminder of the intergenerational betrayal that lack of action on and implementation on the environment is. And this meeting has to ensure that the next 50 years will not be the same, that future generations get to be born into a prosperous world. We, organized youth, take it upon ourselves to mobilize for future generations, just as we do for today's children and youth. Not too long ago, when many people in this room we're still in power. We young people around this table, we're the future generations. And being born into a world of cascading crisis, it's maybe not too strange to understand that we don't have too much hope. So we ask you, step up or step aside. Children and young people are engaged. They are organized. They are claiming space. But just as the youth envoy said, the space is shrinking. If we are serious about our commitment to future generations, we need to make the next chapter of our civilization one where space is expanding and where children and youth have real, meaningful, substantial power. 4 things will help us achieve this. We need to uproot systems that hinder our progress. Colonialism, inequality, patriarchy, short-termism, militarism, and violence. Our systems limit our progress and they limit our imagination. Secondly, we need to make sure that policy making centers children, youth, and future generations, not just as target groups, but as agents. The key word in this discussion is agency. Children and youth are the best guardians of future generation. Invite them into citizenry, into power, do it meaningfully. Thirdly, we ask you, please use your power. We are standing on the outside looking in, and we can just do so much on the streets and in organizations. We ask you, open the doors, change your own roles from gatekeepers to door openers. And lastly, raise the ambition and do it urgently. What does that mean? We've already told you here at Stockholm Plus 50. Implement the Global Youth Policy Paper, criminalize ecocide, implement a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, and we ask of member states in this room, please take these concerns into heart, take them into your leadership dialogues, and take them into the summary of this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Angela.
Thank you all for allowing me to be at this table today to amplify the voices of so many youth who were supposed to be in attendance but were unable to do so due to visa problems. I'm honored to speak today due to the Stockholm 72 Convention's memorialization of the rights of future generations. Whether I'm working on gender minority representation or environmental grassroots, I think that the ask for future generations is the same. It's the concept of choice. I can sit here today and talk to you about mechanisms for long-termism, such as lawsuits to protect the rights of future generations or a lower discount rate for the social cost of carbon. But ultimately, I think whatever motivations we have are linked to this promotion of this concept of choice, of autonomy. Because choice is a privilege that many of us may have, that we have a responsibility to protect. The choice for future generations to consider what sorts of avenues they want to pursue, what sorts of lives they want to live. We don't know in 20 years or 40 what norms or values might prevail in this coming time. We don't even know what a sustainable society looks like today, but we can't agree on that. But we need to give others the choice to have that ability to agree to disagree. People ask me why I wanted to join the climate movement, but I didn't have a choice to do so. My home is ravaged by Hurricane Harvey and other natural disasters, but I hope that other people in the future do have that choice to decide to go on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both, and I want to thank you all for such candor, obviously for such a leadership that you've shown, and for the challenge that you very starkly posed to all of us. I want to create an opportunity now for the delegates from member states who've joined us here to have an opportunity to share anything on the floor. we will allow ourselves to run over a bit. I appreciate there are a lot of times to navigate, but we'll go over a bit. I would ask you all to try to keep your reflections short to just a couple of minutes, and if you have a longer statement, please share it with our team, and we'll make sure that that's captured in some way in the documentation of this roundtable. Can I ask you if you can stand up your placard if you wish to speak? I will do my best to see you in the right order. I apologize if I don't, it is just my eyes, but I will do my best. I see the distinguished delegate from Norway on my left.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you, Annika and Kyriako, for bringing us together. I think this is an excellent panel on maybe the most important reason that we're all here. And I would like to make a few comments from Norway's side. One is, I think, a very practical thing is that we need to bring young people into our delegations in these meetings. So not only meet them as young people, which is also great, but actually have them in our delegation. And Mathilde Angeltveit here is with me as a part of my delegation. She was selected not by me, but by the Norwegian Council of Children and Youth to be their representative. And that is actually very important, that we don't do youth washing, which is exactly as bad as greenwashing, but we actually ask the relevant representative organizations to nominate people whom are seen to represent the people that they are here to represent. So I'm proud to do that, and we will expand that in future meetings, working very much on making that real. Secondly, I think it's important for us boomers to realize that the kids and the young people are actually right. This is one of the large popular movements on the planet which are actually facts-based. Most populist movements are based on alternative facts, but the youth climate movement is based on real facts. And Greta Thunberg puts it very nicely when older people say, why should we listen to a young girl? She said, you shouldn't. You should listen to the science. I'm just repeating what science tells you, and that is absolutely true and an incredibly important point to bring forward. And we also need to recognize that young people who want change should demand faster action from us, as they do, which I think is absolutely appropriate. They are also good agents of change, because those are the people I know who are most prone and willing to change how we live our lives. There's enough people around on my age who is very resistant to change and actually thinks change is frightening, whereas young people correctly understand that continuity is much more frightening than change. And that's why we need to see this as a movement that is an ally to all of us who want to go not for incremental adaptation, but for fundamental, systemic, transformational transformation. Second last point, Elizabeth, is there's a health issue here, which I think we have to be honest about. There's a lot of anxiety, climate angst among young people for perfectly understandable reasons. And it's not very healthy for our society if a lot of young people, rather than become activists, become passive and disappointed and just leave at least democratic politics. And I will say in my statement later that the most important part of meetings like this is not the eloquence of our words, but the observable deeds that follow. And if the discrepancy between words and deeds is too strong, I think the outcome is that the next generation will lose trust, both in democratic political systems and in multilateralism itself. So we have to do what we say we will do, and we have to come back and say first what we did before we promise to set even higher goals the next time around, if we want to keep the young people as a solid ally for transformational change. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. I have the distinguished delegate from Zambia next, and we're trying to figure out how long we can keep this room, so I will stay tuned. But please, sir, may I turn to you next?
Thank you very much. I think I'll join the rest in congratulating Sweden and Kenya for convening this meeting. I think this is very, very important, in particular to the youths, because we are coming 50 years after the first very important meeting. It's basically to hand over the baton. I've been listening very attentively to the youths, their lamentations, their pleadings. I think I want to challenge them to demand that we act to save the planet for themselves. lamentations will not help. A quick example is where I come from. As an MP, I was elected mainly by the youths, so their agenda is entrenched in what I'm doing. I encourage the youths, particularly those who said, step up or step aside. They are telling us the odd ones. Another one says, business as usual will not be allowed. They want less speeches, but more concrete action. The challenge is back to yourselves. Do more action yourselves to make us change. Indeed, we are living in a time when the youths must take over. And in this respect, I also want to join the rest of the other members in endorsing the statement put forward by Sweden. But I also want to say to Sweden, Kenya, and the rest of us that coming up with statements and signing them will not be enough. We must act for us, as Norway has said, to get the trust and confidence from the youths. It's a win-win situation for us, the youths, as well as us, the odd ones. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm very terribly sorry. I think we only have room for one more speaker, and that's the distinguished delegate from Costa Rica. Before I go to you, sir, what I would suggest for those who would wish to take the floor, we will please follow up with us after the fact, and we can find a way to capture your reflections in, as I say, the documentation of this meeting, which we will memorialize in a number of ways. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to convene this meeting. So important to have the voice of youth here in this room and in this during this conference. What I must add, I will send you my statement, but first of all is I want to share from the perspective of a disarmed democracy how important it was the disarmament for the youth. And for myself, when I was young, I didn't have to go to the army. And then all the spending that my government made was only on education, only to raise the voice of youth people that changed my country at the time and still changing the country. We are leaders on environmental issues, but because probably we spend a lot of money on education, on young people, on children. And this is what I want to send as a call. For sure, there is no possibility that we have a responsibility as adults for the next generations, but it's time to act, and probably one of these actions that we can take is to invest in education. Education, education, education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think that is a wonderful note on which to conclude this incredibly powerful session. We don't begin to have enough time for all of the conversations we need to have and continue to have. We certainly will pledge to do our part to create opportunities for this kind of dialogue. And I just want to thank everybody for their challenges, their statements, their leadership, and for all of the work that I know we are going to do together in the days, weeks, and months to come. And again, our thanks to Sweden and Kenya for their leadership of this conference and in general. Let me ask you all to give everybody a big round of applause as you go on to the rest of your afternoon. And please come see us if you want to share any statements or reflections that we can find a way to capture going forward. Thank you so much.